I will just jump right in, I guess.
Okay.
uh, so, first question, how long have you been teaching Spanish?
So I've been teaching Spanish for about 10 years now. So I started my very first year of graduate school and taught throughout my time at the university there. And then this is my fourth year here at Idaho.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's gone by fast. I feel like I just started here, and all of a sudden I'm 4 years in.
Yeah. So I did a little bit of background just on the MLC website,
Mhm.
and just found the little objectives like communicative proficiency, cultural understanding, acquisition of knowledge, and then analytical ability.
Mhm.
So I was just kind of reading through some of those and was just curious, like, in your opinion, what some of the strengths and weaknesses are of
Mhm.
the MLC department here.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically in terms of the learning objectives,
Or just strengths, I guess, in terms of like teaching approaches, or maybe like outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of teaching approaches and things like that, I think in MLC we're very lucky to have a lot of professors that are very, very dedicated to their students, and also very interested in new ways of teaching and experimenting and trying different things. We're a very young department in general, and so then we get a lot of people that aren't stuck in their ways, right? We all like to try making new classes and seeing what we can do with that. I think it's also nice, one of our strengths is that we do have sort of a diversity of backgrounds, right? So we have, Lori, who grew up kind of between Mexico and California, and then I grew up in the US and learned Spanish in middle school, high school, and college, like some of our students do, and Marta, who comes from Spain, and Ani, who comes from Mexico, and Shannon, and who has a background in education specifically, right? Her degree, her PhD is in education, not specifically in Spanish. And so I think with all of those different backgrounds, we bring in a lot of really good pedagogical and cultural elements, right? That you maybe wouldn't find in a more uniform kind of department. And I think our students leave really getting to see a lot of that background, right? And having those experiences. I love that we have the study abroad requirement and that students go. I know sometimes it can be a challenge for people, but I don't think there's anything better for language and cultural learning than going abroad.
Yeah.
So I think that's another benefit. In terms of weaknesses, I think it's more just structural things, right? In that we're in northern Idaho, right? We don't have a lot in Virginia, or if you're teaching in California or in a bigger city, there are more opportunities to connect your students directly to sort of the Latino community around you, and we have some of that on campus, but outside of campus, there's really nothing in North Idaho.
Yeah.
And it would be cool to have more of that sort of connection, but right, like in Seattle, there's sort of a Hispanic theater company, and they put on plays in Spanish all the time. At UVA, we could go to Washington, D.C. to go to museum exhibits and things, and here, where are you really going to go, right?
Yeah.
But I think we do a really good job with what we've got.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so do you see a lot of Spanish majors or minors coming in who are starting from ground zero, like they've never had Spanish in, say, high school?
We don't get many, no. I think most of them come in with some experience. It would be very difficult, I think, to get through the major if you are coming in with no experience. The minor is definitely possible, and there are people that do that. But I think Spanish is so prevalent in high school these days that most people have background in Spanish, and if they don't, they've probably taken French, or sometimes German, and so then that helps them a little bit too with the language learning.
Oh yeah. And then what does it take to be a successful language student here, and what are some of the things that people struggle with?
Yeah, so I think to be successful here in terms of being a language student, you definitely have to be open-minded. Open to doing things you maybe don't want to do in the classroom, like public speaking, right? We had in 306, Professor Rodriguez from the music school came to talk about Puerto Rican music again, and he made them get up and dance salsa, and they were all like, I don't want to do this, but they did. And you've got to be open-minded enough to want to go abroad, right, and have that experience as well. I think also just I think learning languages is different in some ways than learning something like math or poli-sci, where language, it's really about the day-to-day practice. And so that's why it's so important, and why we all have attendance policies in our classrooms, whereas you might not in a lecture class for economics or something, because actually being physically there and listening and speaking is really important. So I think that sort of willingness to be doing small projects throughout, and coming to class is really important in ways that it maybe isn't quite as obviously important, at least in other fields.
Mm-hmm. Great. Oh yes, so I did a little bit of research on you, aka stalking your profile on the website, and I saw you have a background in teaching English too, which I didn't know.
Yep, yeah,
so
I
what
did.
Was that like?
Oh, it was quite the experience. I'm a much better Spanish teacher than I am an English teacher. And so after I graduated, I got a Fulbright English teaching assistantship grant, and I went to Argentina. And I didn't get as much classroom time as I would have expected because the teachers were on strike in my province almost the whole time I was there. So it was constantly like we'd have class for 1 or 2 days and then we wouldn't.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was really, that was eye-opening. But I found that, and I guess I should have known this because I was going to go get a PhD in teaching Spanish, but being a native speaker isn't enough to be a good teacher of the language, right? It's not just being able to use it, but to think about strategies to teach other people how to use it, right? And to understand the mechanics behind it. And so that's where I think, like I said, we have a very diverse department, and we have people that are native speakers and people who aren't. And I think both groups have different strengths, right? Like the native speakers are obviously going to have the perfect pronunciation and they've got the cultural background. And then those of us that didn't grow up speaking Spanish, we've got that background in that we had to learn the grammar. Right?
Yeah.
And like Lori always says, like she's like, Ashley, you know Spanish grammar and the names of it better than I do because you had to learn it, right?
Yeah.
And then I also feel like having had to learn it, I am more aware of where students are likely to make mistakes because I made those same mistakes at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's helpful too. And I didn't have that when I taught English, right? I taught English and I was like, why aren't they getting this? Like, this is so obvious, right? And you can definitely learn to be a good teacher. And that's what everybody that's a native speaker of Spanish in this department has done, right? They've also had to get trained. But I never did that when I went to go teach English, and to just sort of learn on the job and realize, like, oh, this isn't as intuitive as I thought it would be.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was fun.
Yeah. So that was in Argentina, you said?
Yeah.
So what was, can you describe kind of the need to learn English there, or how prevalent that is?
Yeah, so the school that I was teaching at, actually, and this is interesting from your teacher education point of view, the school that I was teaching at, it was called an Instituto Terciario, I don't even know how you translate to English, but basically it was a professional school, an equivalent to university for people that wanted to be teachers eventually.
Oh.
So I was teaching people that were going to be English teachers in Argentina. And there's a huge demand right now for learning English in terms of job opportunities, right? If you work in tourism at all. The town that I was in was an oil drilling town.
Oh.
And so a lot of U.S. companies like Halliburton were very present there. And so people wanted to learn English so that they could work for Halliburton.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to know English to work in a lot of positions, but if you wanted to work in management or you wanted to work in, sort of the administrative aspects, you needed to know English.
Oh.
So even in Patagonia, in a pretty small town, there was definitely a demand to learn English for job stuff, but also just for cultural stuff. Like my students would constantly ask me to help them translate song lyrics. And I remember one time a student came and was like, can you translate this song for me? And it was Holla Back Girl. And I was like, I think I'm going to have to use the internet here because I don't know what any of these words really mean, right? Like, and that was another thing that was kind of like shocking to me, was being like, oh yeah, like I speak a certain kind of English.
Oh, yeah.
Right, but there are lots of varieties of English, and I don't know them all.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was kind of a fun experience. Relatedly, it was just a sort of a fun anecdote. I was told that I wasn't allowed to help in the phonetics classes because the phonetics teacher insisted on teaching them British English and British pronunciation, and I was an American, and so therefore she did not want my presence in the classroom because I might confuse the students. And that just goes back to historical ties. Great Britain has long had a pretty close relationship, for better and for worse, with Argentina. Like there was a Anglo-American Treaty of Friendship in like 1825 or something, and like since then, really, there's been a lot of the sort of British influence.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It was weird though. I'd be like, no, you don't speak English properly. You can't teach the phonetics. I don't.
Wow. So, like, in terms of just teaching methods, like, when you were working with that teacher there, the English teacher, would you say it was comparable to, like, how we do things here?
I think in Argentina, there's still more of an emphasis on the mechanics of language and getting it right and memorization and things like that. It's starting to change, and I think it also depends on the university or institute. Like the one that I was at was not a super high quality one in a lot of ways, and so maybe that explains some of it. But here, I think the general paradigm is that language is for communication. And so if a student isn't pronouncing something totally properly or is using incorrect grammar, we want to correct them eventually. But that as long as they're getting their point across, that's truly the purpose of learning a language, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think there was a lot more sort of red pen and, that's not how you do this in Argentina, and a lot more. Like the only cultural things that I saw introduced in the class would be they had to read like 1984 or something like that, right? Whereas here I feel like, at least in this department, we try to integrate it into everything.
Yeah. Like with the films or...
Yeah, exactly. Using films, or even just like in daily activities, trying to make sure, like in the lower level grammar classes, that the fill in the blank sentences to practice the subjunctive occasionally have cultural content to them, right? Like it might be a sentence about some artist from Latin America or a Spanish singer, right? And I didn't see that so much there, but I do think it's changing, and I do think it depends. Like I'm sure there are phenomenal schools that use a lot of the same strategies that we do, but where I was, it was definitely a little bit more kind of rote.
Yeah.
I think that also had to do with the fact that none of the teachers in the school that I was in had ever been outside of, like, had never been to an English-speaking country.
Oh.
Right? So it was like, well, what access did they have to some of these materials too?
Oh, yeah. So you kind of, like, touched on this earlier, but could you just describe your, like, overall personal experience learning Spanish as your second language in the U.S.?
Yeah, so... I think like most people, my experience in middle school and high school was not super awesome in terms of learning it. Like, I obviously liked it enough to continue, but I definitely remember watching the movie Selena like 6 or 7 times because the teacher didn't have anything we were going to do, and like I took the AP Spanish test and everything too. So like, I mean, I got pretty far in learning it, but I don't ever remember being like, this is great, But then in college, I had just really wonderful professors, and I went to a small liberal arts school where we had very small classes, right? So we'd have 15 students and the professor, and they were very engaged and very creative and always coming up with new things for us to do, and it was just such a great experience. And then I think it was really study abroad where I made that jump from like sort of getting it and like actually getting it. Like I remember thinking when I went to Chile, I was like, yeah, I speak Spanish, I'm pretty good at this, like I took Spanish 3.0 whatever, And then I got there and I was like, I don't understand a word anyone's saying.
Chile's tough too, though.
It's really tough. Oh my gosh, it was so hard. But then after the year there, like I came back and I was like, oh yeah. And I actually ran into one of my high school Spanish teachers when I got back from studying abroad. And I was like, oh, my Spanish is better than his is now, right? So it was that experience. And then I think then having gone to grad school in it and kind of continuing to go abroad and work on it, like I see now students struggling with like ser and estar and por and para. And I have at some point the switch has flipped, and I've gotten to the point where if I read a sentence with the wrong por or para, it literally doesn't make sense to me.
Oh yeah.
Whereas before I'd have to still be sitting there and like going through the rules, right? And so that's what I kind of always try to tell my students. I mean, a lot of it is just time and practice, right? Like you can study those rules all you want, but until you've seen it used or heard it used in 1,000 different contexts, it doesn't become natural, right? Where it's just like it actually means something different if you use the wrong one.
Oh yeah.
So it's been like this weird transition to see, and then I still feel like when it's been a while since I've been abroad, I feel like my vocabulary and language skills like dip a little bit, especially vocabulary. Because even though we talk about different things in my classes, like I'm still using a fairly reduced vocabulary. Right? Like I'm not using the vocabulary I might use to go to a supermarket or to go
even
to a doctor
just around
or something.
The house. Yeah,
exactly, right? Like it's just such a limited world when you're using it in just certain contexts and not every moment of every day. So I sort of feel like it starts to drop off a little bit, and then I go back abroad and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I remember all these words now, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's always interesting.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, just the context thing, because I'm reading Game of Thrones in Spanish.
Oh, awesome.
But I was like, I feel like just getting through that book, like the subjunctive really clicks now, because you just see it in the sentences and it's like, oh, it's not even that scary, it's just in every sentence, and it just means something different.
Exactly, and that's what I always tell my students. Like, if you want to be a better writer and if you want to speak better, you just need to read,
Yeah.
and listen to things too. But reading is nice because it's right there on the page, and you can take the time to figure things out if you want. But even just reading passively, like, you just start to internalize what the structures are, right? Or like, what preposition goes after this verb. Just because
those are the worst.
I know, and I still struggle with prepositions. But you just, once you've seen them so many times, it's just natural. I was helping my husband. He's taking 202 now. He's auditing it.
Oh, that's great.
And so he's doing his little exposition today, and I was helping him go through. And like, I'd see some of his mistakes and be like, well, why would you even think that was that, right? And I'd be like, oh, well, obviously, because you haven't been exposed to it a million times. And if I think about English, that's exactly what it is, right? So it's sort of fun to see him going through it now, and then my daughter kind of learning, but as a child, right, where I think it's a lot more natural. She doesn't translate from English to Spanish in her head.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see. It's going to be fun to watch both of them.
Yeah. It's so cool.
Yeah, actually, the final lines of his presentation are something about, because we're going to Uruguay in the fall.
Oh, right.
And teaching for USAC, and he's like, it's going to be this, like, competition, man versus child. Who will learn more Spanish and faster, me or Emily? The answer is going to be Emily, because the 3-year-old will pick it up much faster than the 30-something-year-old.
Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah, our brains are crazy.
Yeah. So I guess just one final question. What's your personal teaching philosophy?
You make that sound like that's the short, easy question, but I will keep it short. So I have a couple of different parts to it. One is that my goal is that students will actually enjoy it and be motivated to take other classes, because if students aren't personally motivated to do the learning, there's no way to learn a language, because it really is that daily or almost daily practice and keeping it up. Probably secondly would be, as part of that, making sure there's some flexibility in the classroom so students can direct, like with the Spanish 404 class you took, right? Choosing the topic of your final project.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just like all writing the same paper, right? Because then if you can research the things you're actually interested in, you're more likely to do it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, like having a variety of activities and different structures and things in every class period. Those are sort of the main, I guess, goals that I have. I've got a lot of other like smaller pieces, like, constantly focusing on scaffolding. So we start with something small and then we make it bigger and we add on to that and add on to that, instead of just like throwing you into the deep end and being like, well, good luck, right?
Yeah.
And then, I guess, things like that. And then just constant practice, right, for everybody in all different things.
Yeah. Well, I can definitely say I've enjoyed all your classes and like that final project. Like
Thank
that
you. I'm
was
glad to hear
that was really a highlight for me.
It was a highlight for me. I had so much fun, and honestly, like a lot of my teaching philosophy is kind of selfish too. Like, I would get bored if we did the same thing every day, and I would get really bored reading 30 of the exact same papers. And when you guys do fun topics like that you've picked and you actually care about, you turn in better product, and I get to learn about 30 different things instead of 30 papers telling me why X is different than Y, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's definitely a selfish aspect to it too. But I think students enjoy it and get a lot out of it. So,
oh, yeah.
So hopefully it works for everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's all I've got.
Right. That wasn't
Thank
too
you.
scary.
Yeah.